Good evening and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. And this week we continue along on the road to the Kentucky Derby. Joining me again is Capping with Candace Hare. And Candace, this week before we jump into the Fountain of Youth and a couple of other races, the Busher Stakes and the Devona Dale, let's take a look back at the Louisiana races last week. First off, we had the Rachel Alexandra, and a 74-1 shot lit up the tote board.
Yeah, it did. I mean, it was a race that absolutely melted down pace-wise, and that's sometimes when you see those big prices. So I'm not really sure where I place Venus Valentine going forward. I think I certainly preferred others in there, most notably Midnight Onosoni. I thought ran a massive race given the pace dynamics and where she was on the track throughout. For me, she's the one to take forward, but can't take the win away from Venus Valentine, that's for sure.
It was an interesting race because it just seemed like at the top of the stretch, the horses just all seemed to be laboring, and they got really tired.
Yeah, they did. I mean, but that's kind of that track too, right? It's a testing surface, so if they're going to go quick over it, then it's going to definitely be a stagger fest at the finish.
Do you think Stage Play can bounce back and still make the Oaks Field, or what's kind of the status with her, you think?
I think she can. I mean, for me, I think that was a race where you saw several tough trips just because you had those presser types like her who are up there and kind of cop the worst of it pace-wise. So, you know, maybe she doesn't quite have as much heart as we thought, but the talent is still there, and I'm sure we'll see her bounce back should she get a more favorable pace scenario going forward.
How about your thoughts on the Risen Star? That one, we both selected Gunrunner, but it ended up being an 11-horse field, and you know, there was a couple of trips in the race, but I thought overall the race kind of went as expected. Candy, my boy, took the lead from the outside because of the post draw, and a couple of horses chased in second, and then we saw the finish.
Oh, exactly. I mean, we both liked Gunrunner in there, and I think that, you know, he ran a very nice race, so I was glad to see him in the finish because I do think that he has some talent and has some potential for progression going forward. I mean, I don't think Aero Force was a super surprise to either of us who both kind of doubted his ability to handle a dry dirt track. But, you know, all in all, I think it was a solid race. And, you know, for me, Gunrunner really stands out among that group, and he's the one that I'll want going forward. I think that people might a little bit overblow the trip troubles that Mo Tom got when he was cut off a little bit by Bistraya, who was fading in the stretch. But I don't think he was ever getting there. And he got the best of it pace-wise. And he was on the right part of the track, a track that was playing favorably to inside, you know, being towards the gold rail all the time too. So for me, yeah, he had trip trouble, but he had a lot of things in his favor as well. So I think the biggest thing for me with that race is to not get suckered into Motom next time.
Well, it's just interesting because I think, you know, we've seen two races so far and two different winners, and I think the Louisiana Derby could have another 10, 11 horse field. So you know, for a change, we might see three races and maybe possibly three different winners. I think we got to see who shows up in that final leg. But there's a couple of horses that are maybe thinking of coming in new, and then I think that same field, if you kind of rerun the race and switch post positions, I think you could have different results. So I'm kind of looking forward to the Louisiana Derby. This week we're looking forward to three prep races for both the Kentucky Derby and the Kentucky Oaks. Let's start in New York, and I thought this drew a very competitive field. And I'm not quite even sure who's going to be favorite here.
Oh, I know. It's a very stark contrast from last year when we knew all along who was going to be favored in this race. This year it's a much more competitive field. And I think a race that's going to be truly run as well because you have a few horses like Lost Raven, like Whistling Straits who like to go forward. You have your fair share of, you know, presser, mid-pack types. So I think this is going to be a really nice race despite it being, you know, on the smaller side as far as field size goes. For me, the horse that I'm, you know, really going to give a big, long look to is Katniss the Victor. I thought she ran really well last time, just missed when she had quite a bit of trip trouble, hit the gate at the start. I really liked her run there. I thought she put in a, you know, pretty long, sustained run there, and I was impressed by that effort. So, you know, this is a horse who I think, you know, maybe she just might be one of these who really takes well to the Aqueduct inner track, but I think that there's some potential for her as far as up here in these New York stakes. So I'm going to go with Katniss the Victor.
Floradora picked up the victory in the Busanda the last time. I thought that race, again, kind of the pace kind of meltdown, and then it just
Mhm.
seemed like she was kind of the only one running in that race. But, I do think she seems to run a good, honest race every time.
Oh no, she absolutely does. And what she has that helps her too is that she's very tractable. She can be up near the speed like she was in her maiden race at Saratoga. They went very fast there early, and she was right up on it. And that's a stark contrast from her in the Demoiselle when she pulled back quite a fair bit too. So she's very tractable, which is helpful, I think, in these sorts of fields where small field races can be tricky from a pace perspective sometimes. So I think it's nice to have that sort of tractability. She's probably the one to beat in here, but I don't think that she holds, a significant edge over these. So that's probably why I'm looking to beat her a little bit. I think she might be a little bit overbet here.
When I started looking at the field, I thought, okay, the inside horse, Lost Raven, can show some speed. I'm interested in Whistling Straits because I do think she did step up her game in that last race, but it was kind of a hard race to judge because there was like a 3-5 shot in that last race at Gulfstream, and that horse just didn't fire that day. Meanwhile, Whistling Straight kind of outran the other speed
Yeah.
and kind of just kept on running, but she was bet down in her first two races. Is it possible she can just kind of sit there at 67, 68 on the buyer level scale and fit in with these groups?
I think a lot for her depends on what happens with Lost Raven. I mean, we see horses, if they're able to get an uncontested lead, are able to get brave out front. But I think that Lost Raven's going to kind of give her a little bit of a hard time up there. And it's not even the fact whether or not they go fast or slow. I think, especially with horses this young, the fact of whether or not the pace is contested or not is what makes the difference. So I think Whistling Straits is vulnerable here, as is Lost Raven, because I do see them, possibly kind of just being up close enough to each other to bother each other. But yeah, I think I would be against Whistling Straits here for sure.
I'm going to go with Dreams to Reality. Uh, I thought the race flow didn't really favor her the last time, and I thought she had a little bit of trip trouble early on in the race. And since she didn't close and really fire the last time, sometimes I'll come right back and take a horse like that. So Dreams to Reality, I think she can capable of getting the distance. I like the trainer, and I like the jockey switch. We talked last week. Again, I'm not always interested in trying to find a better jockey. I just want a new jockey. I just think sometimes that can wake a horse up just to get a new jockey. I think that may have happened with a couple of those winners last week, and even a couple of other runner-ups like Forever Mo and a couple of these other horses. Like they had jockey switches, and I think they I think they ride horses differently.
Yeah, and like we heard about last week, some jockeys, just their styles were more suitable to different horses. So it's not even necessarily if one jockey has a higher win percentage than the other. It's, who really makes that perfect marriage with the horse.
So a chance for an upset here. I'm picking Dreams to Reality. Anything on Mo d'Amour? This horse went to Laurel and got the big win, and it's raced at Aqueduct, and it faced Lewis Bay, who's going to be pretty highly regarded when we talk about the Devona Dale.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to discount Fletcher horses that are up in New York, and this is a daughter of Uncle Mo who's been on fire lately. I think my problem with her is that she's really inconsistent. I thought her debut victory was very, very nice, and then, as you say, against Louis Bay and the Demoiselle, she had a lot of trouble in there, so it's kind of hard to, really hold that race against her. I think I'd be willing to forgive that one, but, she ran against Constellation then, and really, really struggled there, and I think that's the one that kind of really makes me pause for a minute. I mean, perhaps it was a little bit short of her ideal distance, going 6 furlongs, but she was in no way, shape, or form in that race at all, and she wasn't even bet like it for a Pletcher horse either, which is really weird. Came back and won that allowance race, but she's going to find deeper waters here, so I think this is one of the few Pletcher horses that you can feel fairly confident betting against.
So do you think it's a race you kind of go 2 or 3 deep, or you kind of just take a stand and go with 1 or 2 horses?
For me, I probably would use 2. Like I said, I like Katniss the Victor. That'd be my top choice in there. That'd be the horse I'd be betting to win. But if you're looking to play multiple race wagers, I'd probably snag one more. Somewhat either Dreams to Reality or Floridor, but it's going to depend on the price. As you said, this is a wide open race, so I'd be looking between those 2, but it'd be whichever of the 2 are the higher price, because I think those 2 are fairly evenly matched. But Katniss Victor would be my top choice and a must-use for me.
Let's go to Florida, the Devona Dale, and this race has got a small field. But again, I think there's different ways you could go, and even the exacta could get a little bit interesting because you never know with horses coming in off the layoff which ones might fire and which ones might not.
No, exactly. I mean, some trainers and some barns, they crank up their horses first up, and some horses are easier to get fit first time out, too. So you have those variables in here. I'm sure Catherine Sophia is going to be a very, very, very heavy favorite in this spot, coming off of 3 extremely easy victories, the last of which was in the forward gal here locally. She's certainly the one to beat, and I think that, you know, the way with which she won the forward gal, having broken a little bit slow there, too, caught even more eyes than it would have to begin with. So, I mean, I think we're looking at a horse in here who should probably be around 6 to 5, 7 to 5, and firmly the one to beat. That being said, I think that she is beatable, especially in a race like this that has so much speed. I mean, we're going a mile now, and there's several horses in here that seem plenty fast. Argos a Charmer is very fast. Dearest is very fast. And so is Louis Bay can go forward. So I think there's quite a bit of speed in here. For that reason, I think that although Catherine Sophia has the best resume of the horses here, I do think she could be beaten in this spot.
You know, sometimes when a horse breaks slow, it actually can help them out. And I'm just wondering if that trip the last time is being a little exaggerated on Catherine Sophia, and maybe that helped her out. She had the 2 big wins. She's fast. But I agree with you. I mean, I think she's really going to get challenged by Dearest on the front end. And I like the Tampa Bay shipper. I think our girl's a Charmer's got legitimate speed.
Yeah, no, I think that as well. I mean, she's one who I think could possibly sit, you know, a good trip in here. She just might be the speed of the speed in this spot. The Cassie Barnes firing on all cylinders at this point in time as well, so I wouldn't put it past her. I think I would definitely prefer her over Catherine Sophia.
Interesting, a couple of horses come out of the Demoiselle, and at the time everybody was lamenting on the slow time of the Demoiselle, but it was still a quality race, and making the wide move that day was Louis Bay. You know, she's got some really good breeding, not just on the sire side. Comes from a solid race mare. Summer Raven was a nice stakes horse. Ran at Keeneland and some bigger races out east. What do you think about Louis Bay in this spot, and can she be maybe an Oaks type horse?
I think it's a little bit tricky. I wonder if this is a horse who will ultimately find her home on the turf. Has a lot of turf breeding in there. I think this is a big ask for her coming off the long layoff, and you know, for me with fillies who, you know, making that jump from 2 years old to 3, I'm always a little more wary than the colts because you see quite a few fillies who are extremely precocious and then they kind of taper off a bit. It seems like we see that more with the fillies than even the colts. So I would take much more of a wait-and-see approach with Louis Bay. She wouldn't be my top choice in here.
Well, I narrowed it down to our girl's a superstar, and then I finally just decided to go with Louis Bay over our girl's a Charmer. I just think those two, and I think our girl's a Charmer is going to put away the other speed, and I kind of want Louis Bay to kind of maybe pick up the pieces. She's got a long work tab, and this is kind of a race they pointed for all along. So I think this was at least the plan.
Yeah, it seemed to be the plan. For me, I'm going to go with Dearest. I liked her last one a lot. I picked her up on my fantasy team as a result. She seems like a definite like a miler type in here, and what I like from her is that of the speeds in here, she's the one who's really shown the tractability. So I think from the 2 holes, she could possibly just get a nice rails ride behind the main speeds in here and make her move, and we'll find out if she's good enough. But she's undefeated in 2 starts. She beat our girl's a Charmer in her maiden special weight. So I think Dearest is a big chance here, and I'm actually surprised that she's been overlooked as much as she is. It seems like all the attention's on Catherine Sophia, but Dearest might not be an Oaks horse, but I think over here over a mile she could be effective.
Yeah, and they really do a nice progression for the Oaks Trail at Gulfstream. They go 7 furlongs a mile, mile and a 16th. And let's take a look at the Fountain of Youth, Grade 2, $400,000 purse. We're in the championship season, and last week we saw Gunrunner win the first 50-point race. This is a race that a few of these horses have been targeting. Interesting development today, a horse that a lot of people kind of liked as a little bit of on a sleeper side was Cherry Wine, and evidently he coughed and they just wasn't feeling up to it. So they're going to scratch and maybe run in the Tampa Bay race in a couple of weeks. But also, they're not quite sure if Awesome Banner is going to run, and that completely affects the pace of the race because they may wait for the Tampa Bay race as well.
They might. I was actually really surprised by that one because the trainer, Stanley Gold, was saying how, you know, they're not sure if they want to run him, but that his other horse, Fellowship, needs a lot of speed. So I'm thinking, well, don't you want to put him in there because he's the speed in here? But yeah, it actually sounds to me from the comments like they're gonna send him to Tampa. I would be surprised based off the quotes I was seeing if he ends up running here. I think, you know, people maybe at the last minute are starting to run from Mohaymen a little bit. But, you know, even though it's going to be a small field, especially if Awesome Banner scratches, this isn't a field lacking in quality. Of course, Mohaymen is, you know, the most accomplished individual here. He hasn't stepped a foot wrong, and he'd be the one to beat in here. Zulu, maybe the most overhyped of the 3-year-olds in America's in here. I mean, he has legitimate talent. This is a nice horse, but I wouldn't take, you know, his Gulfstream allowance wish over the sloppy track at face value. Certainly, to me, this is a horse who most definitely improved for the sloppy surface, and it takes 5 minutes of looking at his pedigree to see exactly why. So, you know, was he the best in that race? Probably, but I don't think he was 7 lengths fast either. So he's a nice horse, but Mohaymen certainly is going to be the toughest, you know, type that he's sort of faced. Maybe under the radar a little bit is Fellowship. He was 3rd behind Mohaymen and Greenpoint Crusader in the Holy Bull. I don't expect him to reverse form with Mohaymen, but I do think that he's, you know, a little bit better than people are giving him credit for. So for me, I'm going to look to play, you know, just an exacta to try to get, you know, 3-4 to 1 maybe. So I'm going to play Mohaymen over Fellowship. I just think Fellowship's going to go off at a much bigger price than he deserves, given his Holy Bull run, and I think people are going to overbet Zulu off that allowance win. So I'd rather take the more proven individual in the spot, and there is some speed in here, so he should kind of close somewhat late, and I think he has a horse who, you know, legitimately improves for going further. He's probably just a cut below, you know, the Derby runners that we're seeing that are the top of the crop, but he's an honest little horse. So I'm going to go Mohaymen on top over Fellowship, and the play is just that straight exacta.
What about Awesome Speed? He's kind of an exciting horse. He's won 3 in a row, and he stepped up in class the last time. And you know, his speed figures on a couple of different services put him right in the mix if you just go by what their speed figures have been to date.
They have. The problem I have with him is he seems like he's gotten real lucky in that he's encountered several speed-favoring surfaces, and he's the one who's always up on the lead. So it's really hard for me to kind of take his wins super seriously, given, you know, the tracks that he's running over, at least the conditions of the tracks he's run over. I mean, given we're at Gulfstream, so, you know, this is race 12. You might see all the way through the data that's playing super favorably to speed, and if that's the case, then I would certainly adjust my plays. But assuming a fair track, I think that he's, you know, a cut below probably the best in here.
Well, I do think how Awesome Banner scratches or doesn't scratch affects the pace of this race. If Awesome Banner runs, you know, I think he's fully capable of stringing this field out and running a bang-up race and running second to Mohaymen.
Yes.
If he doesn't run, I see Zulu kind of on an uncontested, unpressured lead, and I see Mohaymen just running down Zulu, and it's a pretty straight exacta. So Awesome Banner, I guess Zulu likes the fact that Awesome Banner may switch to the other race, and I think it hurts Fellowship a lot if Awesome Banner doesn't run in the race.
No, it does. That's why it's so bizarre to me, because it's the same trainer. You would think that you'd be really trying to, yeah, I mean, it's a bizarre move. Like, I would just think that, you know, those same connections, same barn, same trainer, that you try to make the best conditions for one of your horses instead of, you know, you can get cute, leave Fellowship in here where he has no speed, then send, you know, Awesome Banner over to Tampa, which is looking like it's coming up tough, and instead of having one horse who might have had a chance to get in the Derby, you might end up with 0. So I would really hope they'd keep Awesome Banner in here just for the barn's sake. I think that, you know, those connections have 2 good horses. They might as well use them to help each other to get one in, but I kind of really think he's going to come out. That's just what it sounded like in quotes.
Yeah, and I have a little theory on that. Is that this stable, they've sold prospects in the past, and I think if you go to Tampa Bay and you wire that race and you're 4 for 4, I think the $2, $3, $4 million offer starts coming in, and I know they've done that in the past. So it makes sense from a financial standpoint, and it makes sense from, this horse has been really fast. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to lose my undefeated record to Mohamed. I mean, I think I'd rather live the Derby dream for another 3 weeks and try to go to Tampa, and then you get to live it for 3 more weeks if you go to the Bluegrass. Like, I don't think there's any. I mean, now granted, you could just say, well, if he beats Mohamed, then he's the top dog, but even if the problem is with Mohamed is he's good. He's another horse like Nyquist. It's not a matter if they win every race. It's just that if you happen to beat them, you're going to be in a dogfight. You're just going to have to go. You're going to have to lay it all out to beat a horse like Mohamed. That may not be good for Mohamed, but it may not be good for your horse either.
No, and I mean, just historically, we've seen horses from the Holy Bull have done really good in the Fountain of Youth as well. I mean, I just think that when you're going along these circuits, from the first race to the second race, you tend to see form hold extremely well, unless that there's some kind of a majorly differing pace scenario or a really wide draw or something like that. But it's that third leg where you get these horses beat who have looked good all along, and whether it's time, whether it's setbacks, whether it's added distance, it seems like those are the races to take them on, not necessarily here in the middle.
Well, I am picking Mohamed. I do think he's a legitimately good horse. I think he's shown everything you could ask. In his debut race, he showed speed. In his second race, he ran wide and came off the pace. In the Remsen, he split horses on the 2-path. And then in the last race, he kind of sat at the rail, chased some slow fractions, but sprinted away at the end. So anybody who says that Mohamed is kind of a one-trick pony, I think, is just not really watching his races and not giving him the credit that he's due. Has he ran a 100 speed figure yet? No, but he hasn't had to. And, once you get to the 90 level, we all know that whoever wins the Derby is going to run a 100 anyway. So to me, I'm not so sure you want to bring out that 110 before. I think I want to hold that in the holster. So I think if we don't get Awesome Banner in there, I think no matter who wins the race, you're going to see that lower to mid-90s, and then you can maybe up it up a little bit a notch in the Florida Derby, depending on what goes there. I do think you got to watch the horses run. They've got to run. I mean, I think it'd be worse for Mohamed to skip this race and wait another 5. These horses have to run, and so it's kind of the way it is. And I think Mohamed put on a good show the last time. Fellowship made a great run the last time. He just wasn't good enough that day. But he's a good horse, and you take Mohamed out of the race, and then it becomes a whole nother handicapping puzzle.
No, it does. I mean, that's why for me, I'm just going to take Mohamed over Fellowship, just the straight exacta. Hope beyond hope that Awesome Banner stays in the race. But if he doesn't, I still think Fellowship could possibly get him for second. I would just rather take him. He's much more accomplished than Zulu at this point. And like I said, I don't necessarily take Zulu's win entirely for face value because it was on the sloppy track, and it was a track that it looked like he really thrived over, and pedigree-wise, that would back that notion up. So I think Zulu's good, but I do think he's going to be overbet, so that's a problem with him. I agree with you saying, though, about the speed figures for these horses, and it's something a lot of times that's forgotten, is that we're looking to peak on the first Saturday in May, not now. So, horses that go throwing down big speed figures right now, I would actually be worried, because you think, okay, when's the regression coming? Not necessarily a complete bounce, but the point is that you want to have that progression towards Derby Day. And actually, for me, with the best horses, what I almost like is when, maybe not this race, but in like the Florida Derby, Louisiana Derby, Santa Anita Derby, if a horse can finish first or second but will have regressed that little bit, sometimes that's a really good thing, because they can almost build up to a new peak. The scary thing is if you get a horse who runs too fast too soon. You don't want the big figures right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting even more because you have, in the old days you kind of had 2 or 3 speed figures. Now you've got 5 or 6, and when you see them disagree a little bit, then it's kind of like, if you're looking at one, you think he regressed, and if you're looking at another one, you think he moved forward. So that kind of, I think sometimes people can, if you start looking at 4, 5, 6 sets of speed figures, you don't know if a horse is regressing or getting better, and I think that can confuse some people too. So I do think, with speed figures, it's good to look at a couple sets. But I think visually, you kind of want to know how much an effort took out of them, watch the gallop out, a little bit of it is pedigree and breeding, and then, I think having a consistent work tab can help those speed figures go either way too. As long as they stay on their pattern, whether it's every 7 days or every 6 days or however. So I'm looking forward to Moy Hay Men. I mean, it's a $400,000 race. It's a Grade 2. It's an important prep traditionally. This year in Florida, it just seems like, some of those tough luck maiden horses, there's like 3 or 4 of them that never really broke their maiden. I think that a lot of people thought were going to be kind of good, and they just didn't. And that's what's kind of hurt the allowance ranks. And then, a horse like Greenpoint Crusader, they're going to wait to the New Orleans race. And now, kind of if this ends up being a 5-horse field, it makes you wonder if maybe they would have been better off just running. I mean, we've seen reversals in Kentucky where a horse can lose to a horse a couple of times, and you add in a full field and a better post position draw, and maybe things can go goofy. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think it makes the New Orleans race even more interesting if Greenpoint Crusader goes there, and I think we're going to see an interesting bluegrass. It just means Florida, and especially if we get the Nyquist Moy Hay Men matchup, it might literally be a 4-horse field. They may have to bring your buddy Perfect Saint back for that race to even get it up to 5.
Yeah, but what you might end up seeing though is, it'll be interesting because I think there's actually, a race we're not talking about is the Palm Beach. I think there's actually several horses in there who have pedigrees that could be suitable for the dirt tracks, and that's a big field on tap. So I wonder if we're going to see some horses from there moving to the dirt who, maybe trainers opted to put them there instead of run them against Mohaymen. And at the end of the day, that might not be a bad move.
Yeah, because they can split up. A few of them can go to the bluegrass, and a few of them can go to the spiral, and 1 or 2 of them, if they want it, can go to the Florida Derby. So yeah, there is some good pedigrees in there. Let's go off the track this week, and the topic that you want to talk about?
For me, I wanted to talk about I forgot what to talk about. I wanted to talk about Sunland and the Sunland Derby and the Sunland Oaks and how they've had, the equine herpesvirus outbreak there. They say they're reopening, and they say they're going to run the preps for both those races, the local preps, this weekend. They haven't really been commenting on the Derby and the Oaks, though they say at this point in time they're still going to be run. The problem is that, at least right now, as far as I understand, horses are not able to ship in or out of the track. I understand that they want to keep the race there at all costs and run it, but is there a chance that we're going to get some really random Sunland horses in the Derby and the Oaks because nobody's going to go there?
Well, they're going to supposedly open on Friday. We're recording this on Wednesday night, and there's been no new cases for the last 6, 7 days. I think the next 2, 3 days are critical, because if no more new cases, then you're going to be looking at, that's 3 full weeks, and they'll lift that quarantine by that time. But if another case develops, you're right. I mean, if any horses can't ship in, and then that's just going to be, another case develops, nobody's going to bring their top contenders because they're not going to want any of their horses. Now, they could bring them there and keep them there, I guess, thinking that if they win the race, they can just train up to Kentucky. But I'm not so sure Churchill's going to want that either. So, one of the theories I propose is that I just think they should run this race at another track this year. And if they can, agree to ship out the winners of these 2 races this week and test them thoroughly, I just think that makes for a better race. I'm not saying where or how they can run it. Oaklawn seems to love running big races, so maybe at Oaklawn or Santa Anita or whatever, but I just find it hard to believe some of the top-notch trainers are going to bring some really top prospects like a horse like Firing Line type of horse, even if they allow them to ship in there.
Yeah, I wonder what kind of an impact, too, something like that could have on, like, the Baffert Barn, who he usually sends, 1 or 2 prospects for both the fillies and the colts out there. And, he seems to have a little bit of an underperforming group this year. Yes, he has more spirit I think, Malibu Sunset's a little bit of the unknown commodity. But aside from that, they seem to be a little bit of, not quite good enough types, and those are normally the types he would send to Sunland. So kind of, I think that could really impact his group, perhaps.
So yeah, I think the next, by Sunday, I think we'll know a little bit. If they can go a 10, 11-day stretch without any new cases, then I think they'll wait another week, and then they'll allow a horse to ship in right around the 12th or 13th. And, it's run on the 20th this year, which is a Sunday. So that does give it a full, 25, 26 days from the time we're recording this. But it is interesting, and it's always interesting because, even for that fillies, there are certain trainers, Steve Asmussen and Bob Baffert have really made hay running some horses at Sunland, and I've always thought it's a good prep because you're pretty much guaranteed a fast, dry track. It's 1.125 miles, but it's at altitude. So I've always wondered why trainers didn't bring good horses there because it's not even a hard ship. I think it's local to an airport and so like that. So I think it's a good race.
Oh, exactly. I think, remember last year you and I were saying how so many more horses should go there, that there's so many horses who are sent to Louisiana, to, the Louisiana Derby, which is a race that always comes up tough, or, Florida Derby always comes up tough. Like, I never understood why people didn't just send 1 or 2 horses to Sunland, grab the free points, and you're in the Derby, but, this year's obviously a very different case.
Off the track for me this week is a little bit related to last week's racing and then also this week's racing. As when we pick races on here, we usually make one pick for a horse to win the race, and then we talk about the odds. But I think sometimes that decision can bounce back and forth. I mean, like an example last week was Gunrunner. I mean, at the end of the day, he was 5-1. Now, you've got to either make the decision at some point that if he's over 7-2 or 4-1, that you're going to bet him, because I think sometimes people get so wrapped up in, well, I thought he'd be 7-1, or I thought he'd be 4-1. I mean, at the end of the day, like from what we've seen so far on the trail, like a $12 payoff, that's almost a long shot. I mean, you got to take it when you can get it. And the same thing with Moy Haymen this week. I think sometimes people get too wrapped up in, I mean, if you just think he's going to win, then you got to play the exacta or the double, because betting Golden Ray to win the Sultan of Youth, I just don't think is a path to financial freedom either. I mean, to me, it seems like you got to identify a good horse, and you can't pick the price. You can only pick the horse, is what I'm trying to say. Is sometimes who you pick is who you might think is going to win.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what type of plays you're going for. If you're just making a win bet, well, then make it on who you think's going to win. For me personally, if it's races that I'm going to put a large, win wager on, I'll make my own line. So I know who I want to win, but if it's, there's a certain threshold of a price that I'll be willing to take or not. For me, the price hunting more comes in a few different circumstances. One, if I'm playing a pick 3 or a pick 4, then usually there'll be a race that, the reason I'm playing it is because there's a race that there's a favorite that I can't stand. So then I'm price hunting a little bit in a race like that. The other time that I really go price hunting is if I'm watching a track where I suspect there's a bias. Because those are the types of, cards where then if it's race 3 and the first 2 races have just looked like it's absolutely speed, nobody can close an inch, well, then that's the time when I'll make a decision to say, you know what, I don't know if it's biased nut or yet, but if I wait 3 more races, everybody will know. So I have to make a decision at that point in time to just say, you know what, there's these 3 30-to-1 shots that are going to go forward. It looks like it's favoring speed. I'm going to just play them. So, there's situations where I think you go price hunting more so than just picking an actual winner. But when it comes to a win bet, then yeah, you can't get too tied up. You have to pick who you think's going to win, because otherwise you'll talk yourself into horses you don't even really like. You just think that they're a big price. And that's something I've said on Twitter a lot, is that for me, if there's a horse who I don't think it can win, then no price is big enough.
Yeah, I think that's where people kind of make the mistake is that you have to determine if the horse can win and then select who you think can win, and then, yeah, look later on at the price. But, like, to me, like I think Moya Heyman's going to win the race.
Mhm.
Now, if he's 1-5 or 2-5, like I can't start saying, well, gee, Fellowship looks really good. Well, I mean, if you start doing that,
No.
I just think that's where the disaster is. What you hopefully get to is that you're looking at the race and you're like, huh, I kind of like this awesome speed horse a little bit,
Yes.
and then you say, well, okay, he's 10-1, and you're just not totally convinced another horse is going to win. So I think sometimes, people say like, well, 3-1 or 4-1 or even money and all of that. If you told me right now, if you told me I'm going to give you 2-1 on Mohe Men, I'll take it. Like,
No.
if you told me you're going to give me 100-1 on Golden Ray, I'm not going to bet that no matter what, the circumstances.
No, exactly. And I think in races like this, where you first see a heavy favorite, if you think it's going to win, like I said, my play in there was a straight exacta, and that's almost always how I'll play races like that. If there's a heavy favorite who I really like, but I think there's value underneath, well then consider that favorite a free square and pick one or two horses underneath and just play the exactor. For me, I usually just play it straight, but you could probably get away with playing two underneath as well. But I mean, then you're again. For me, I want to narrow it down for these picks to like for me it's a win bet. Like I said, if it's a straight exactor where I think the winner is a lock. Sometimes I think we make things too difficult on ourselves coming up with these really contrived, complicated ways to make money, and I try to keep it pretty simple. Even when I play a pick 3 or a pick 4, I almost always have one or two singles because, again, I'm not playing these races if I don't have a really strong opinion of who I think is going to win. So for me, it always ties back to that. It always revolves on who's going to win and who do I think is going to win. And if I don't have a very strong opinion on that, then I shouldn't be playing the race to begin with. But races like this, where you have a heavy favorite, you can get good odds on a straight exacta. I mean, I've played plenty of races where, the favorite's 1-5. I think he's a lock. I'll play, another horse underneath, and you can get 3, 4, 5-1. I mean, in a race like that where you had that heavy a favorite on top, play that for $100, you're having a good day.
Yeah, I think you got to pick the winner and then focus in on the odds and the betting later on. And I just think sometimes people say like, well, I like Mohe Men, but he's going to be low odds, and then they start liking other horses just to like them. And I think there's a big difference between picking a horse and then who you actually really think is going to win. The price shouldn't determine that. Now, this is the second race of the championship series. Next week we go to the Big A. We've got the Gotham Stakes, and then on March 12th, it's going to get yeah, we got Shagaff and Conquest Big E is looking at that one. Maybe Rally Cry, Sunny Ridge. So I think there's some, that's shaping up as a 3-4 horse battle. And then the next week, now if Awesome Banner goes to that Tampa Bay Derby, you could be looking at horses like Rafting, Destin, Awesome Banner, Brody's Cause off the layoff. And then you go to the San Felipe, which is looking at, Uncle Lino. And then you got more Spirit possibly.
Dancing Candy.
Dancing Candy, and I think there's some good horses there too. So, and then the pride of Southern California, Smokey's Image. So, I think you got some speed coming up. So I think the next 2-3 weeks, I think this year, from what I can tell, the Gotham is, Sunny Ridge is going to have his hands full in that race. So we're going to have a different winner possibly from the first round of the Prep to Jerome. We already had a second winner in the Risen Star. Looks like Mohe Men's going to be tough, but that San Felipe could be a second winner. So I think we're going to see a little bit more diversity, at least looking ahead kind of into the crystal ball. I don't think it's necessarily, last year Dortmund was, all these horses were just repeat winners.
No, they were. Kind of the last 2 years in a row, we saw a lot of that. But, this year I think, for one, we've had truer run races, and that's, half the battle right there. It just seemed like the last couple of years, without, any sprinters or the like, it just seemed like, forwardly placed horses for the most part were winning over and over and over again. So it seems like now we've had some more races with some true speeds, some nice closers, and so then you're going to get a little bit more variety in there, just because you have variety of pace to begin with.
Looking forward to the next couple of weeks, and then, of course, at the end of the month, it kind of comes to a halt. There's like 3 big weeks. So next week is March 1st. That'll do it for another edition of Down to the Wire.